Welcome to All in All.
Hey there.
Today we're diving deep into a world that was vibrant, rowdy, sometimes polished, often surprising, and utterly central to American life for decades. Vaudeville.
That's right.
And this exploration isn't just a random pick. It's a deep dive, custom built for you, drawing from that stack of articles, research, notes you've generously shared with us.
Yeah, it's a fantastic collection of material we have here. It covers vaudeville from pretty much every angle. It's rough and tumble beginnings, the big business it became,
Right.
the incredible range of people involved, both on stage and off, and even its echoes in entertainment today. It really gives us a chance to see this complex world in, well, full dimension.
Exactly. So our mission with this deep dive is to journey through that material. We want to unpack the origins of vaudeville, understand why it became such a phenomenon, see its vast impact on both the people performing and the millions watching, track how it transformed over time, and ultimately figure out what relevance or connection it holds for us right now.
And as always, we're sticking strictly to what your material tells us.
Consider us your guides.
We'll sift through everything, pull out those key insights, the surprising facts, the standout stories, and help you connect the dots on this incredible period of American popular culture.
All right, let's jump in. Where did vaudeville actually come from? It feels sometimes like it just exploded onto the scene, but what we learned is it had a much longer gestation period.
It absolutely wasn't an overnight sensation. No way. The material shows it evolved gradually, with the first subtle signs appearing as early as the 1860s.
That early.
Yeah, and really developing throughout the 1870s and 1880s. It matured out of earlier forms like concert saloons and variety halls, which were often, well, much rougher affairs.
So the idea of a show with different kinds of acts wasn't new then.
Not at all. Similar variety theater had been around in Europe even before the 1860s. And here in the States, before the Civil War, a night out at the theater could already involve a wild mix.
Like what kind of mix?
You might see some Shakespeare alongside acrobatics, singing, dancing, comedy, all in one program. Vaudeville essentially took that existing taste for diverse performances and packaged it into a more structured, often cleaner format.
It pulled from everywhere, didn't it? All those different kinds of traveling shows and popular entertainments that were around.
Precisely. Vaudeville absorbed elements from pretty much every popular amusement form of the time. You had the grand traveling circuses, which brought spectacular acts.
Right.
Dime museums offered a bizarre mix of oddities and live performances. Then there were cleaner variety shows you'd find in amusement parks, on riverboats, even in town halls across the country.
And then there was the other side, the places with a bit more edge.
Yes, exactly. The saloons, music halls, and burlesque houses that catered to a crowd looking for something a bit more risque. All of this was bubbling up in the popular entertainment landscape.
Minstrel shows come up in the material as a major precursor.
Mm-hmm.
What's their connection? Seems pretty significant.
Oh, hugely significant. Minstrel shows were enormously popular from the 1840s onwards. One piece describes them as nothing less than the first emanation of a pervasive and purely American mass culture.
Wow.
And even the heart of 19th century show business. Vaudeville definitely drew heavily from that tradition, including, unfortunately, the practice of blackface performance, which is a deeply problematic but undeniably influential part of vaudeville's heritage.
Yeah, it's a difficult part of the history.
It really is. And we also see the influence of Dutch, which meant German or faux German minstrels mentioned in the material as well.
And what about things like medicine shows? Those traveling acts?
Oh, yes, the medicine shows. They'd travel the countryside, setting up shop with comedy, music, juggling, novelties, anything really, to draw a crowd before they pitched their tonics and elixirs.
A bit of entertainment before the sales pitch.
Exactly. And the Wild West shows, which romanticized the frontier with trick riding, music, dramatic reenactments. Vaudeville took this sprawling, often itinerant world of entertainment and essentially brought it into fixed venues, mostly in growing cities, and then systematized it.
So it was this massive synthesis. Who were the individuals who really took all these threads and wove them into the structure we recognize as vaudeville, the key players?
Two figures are consistently highlighted as crucial in institutionalizing the form. First, Tony Pastor. He's often called the godfather of vaudeville entertainment.
Godfather.
And he was a performer himself, starting out as a singing circus clown.
A singing circus clown becoming the godfather of an entertainment empire. That's quite a leap.
It really is, and it speaks to the fluid nature of show business back then, Pastor was a pioneer because starting in the mid-1860s in New York City, he shrewdly recognized and catered to the spending power and sensibilities of the emerging middle class.
Ah, the middle class. So he saw an opportunity there.
Absolutely. He started featuring what were explicitly called polite variety programs. He opened theaters he grandly titled opera houses, and importantly, he started using the term vaudeville in early 1876 to distinguish his cleaner shows from the rowdier variety halls.
So he's key to the term itself and that move towards respectability.
Yeah.
Making it family-friendly.
Totally. His specific aim was to draw in women and families who previously might have avoided variety shows, and to achieve this, he strictly barred the sale of liquor in his theaters.
Big move.
Huge. He purged the body or course material and famously even offered incentives like giving away gifts of coal and hams to attendees.
Coal and hams.
Yeah.
That's a level of practical marketing you don't see today. Seriously.
A different era, certainly. But his experiment worked. It proved there was a large, untapped market for clean, family-friendly variety entertainment presented in a respectable setting.
Okay, so Pastor lays that groundwork. And then there's B.F. Keith, often called the father of vaudeville entertainment.
Keith took what Pastor started and really scaled it dramatically. He also had roots in the traveling circus world, working for K.T. Barnum for a bit.
Another circus connection. Interesting.
Yeah. Keith opened the Bijou Theater in Boston in 1883, and his major innovation, the really big one, was introducing continuous vaudeville.
Continue. What was the impact of that? How did that work?
It was monumental. Instead of traditional fixed showtimes, the performances ran all day and into the night, with acts just cycling through. Audiences could come and go whenever they please.
Really? Just drop in?
Yep. Drop in for a few acts or stay for hours. This completely changed the accessibility and consumption model for entertainment. It was like an all-day entertainment buffet, basically.
That convenience must have been a huge draw for busy city populations.
Yeah.
Wow. And Keith, along with E.F. Albee later, built this into the massive circuit system we hear about.
Yes, the development of circuits was arguably the greatest economic innovation of vaudeville. The Keith Albee chain became one of the largest, if not the largest. These circuits allowed for standardized booking and contracting of acts for regional and national tours.
So performers could get booked for long stretches.
Yeah, they could be booked for anywhere from a few weeks to a remarkable 2 years on a circuit.
2 years. That's intense.
It is. So it provided structure and opportunity, but it also centralized power enormously.
Okay, so it wasn't just about efficiency.
No. It moved away from more fragmented local booking towards this consolidated, almost industrial scale model. Other major players included chains like Sullivan and Considine, Alexander Pantages, Marcus Lowe.
Lots of names.
Yeah, big chains. Martin Beck's Orpheum circuit was vast. The material says 45 theaters in 36 cities by 1919. Alexander Pantages owned over 30 theaters and controlled roughly 60 more through management deals.
That's an incredible footprint across the country. Just massive.
It truly was a national enterprise. And managers like Keith and Albee were powerful, often ruthless businessmen. They consolidated executive control, sometimes aligning with rivals, forming groups like the United Box Office and the Vaudeville Managers Association.
So they really controlled the whole system.
Pretty much. This structure allowed them unprecedented control over performers and venues alike.
Yeah.
They held all the guards, basically.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, I think. Why did vaudeville matter so deeply to so many people, and just how wide was its reach? It seems like it was everywhere.
It exploded in popularity right around the turn of the 20th century. By 1911, we're talking about hundreds of venues and literally thousands of performers constantly working.
Thousands, wow.
New York City was the epicenter, no surprise there, with 48 theaters featuring vaudeville in 1911. But cities like Chicago and Philadelphia weren't far behind, with 41 and 37 respectively.
So it wasn't just an East Coast thing. It spread out.
Not at all. Its reach was astonishing. It played to audiences across all economic classes and in venues of every size imaginable, from the grand, ornate palaces in major urban hubs all the way down to smaller theaters in rural prairie towns and even western frontier settlements.
And this is where we get that famous phrase, right? The one about testing an act's appeal.
Absolutely. Will it play in Peoria? The idea that if an act resonated with audiences in Peoria, Illinois, it had mainstream American appeal. It became, and honestly still is, a metaphor for something that has broad, universal resonance. Vaudeville was the ultimate proving ground for that kind of mass appeal.
So what was the actual experience like for an audience member? If you went to a vaudeville show, what would you see on a typical bill?
The defining characteristic was just incredible variety. The material lists such a dazzling array of acts, it's almost hard to keep track. You had magicians, every kind of comedian imaginable, circus-style arts, musicians covering every genre, spoken word performances.
Jugglers, dancers.
Right. Jugglers, classic magic, dancers, acrobats, ventriloquists, plate spinners, contortionists, impressionists, animal acts. They even mentioned talking dogs and a singing duck.
A singing duck. Seriously.
Sharpshooters, ladder balancers, dancing magicians, and yeah, some truly bizarre novelty acts like the Lunatic Bakers, or one called Music and Fun in a Butcher Shop.
Music and fun in a butcher shop.
Yeah.
That sounds unforgettable. I wonder what that entailed.
It certainly suggests the wild spectrum of what you might encounter. The bills could swing wildly from, highbrow opera singers to incredibly lowbrow slapstick comedy. Everything was fair game.
How were the shows structured? Was it just random acts?
No, there was a structure. Acts were carefully ordered on the program, often starting with a sketch or maybe a less famous act, flowing through various solos and group performances, building up to the feature act, the big star, and then ending with some kind of final extravaganza, often a musical or dramatic production to send people home happy.
And were all vaudeville venues considered equal? Or were there different levels?
Not at all. The material describes distinct levels, kind of like minor and major leagues. There was small time, which meant lower pay, very frequent performances, sometimes 5 or more a day, and often in rougher, less glamorous theaters.
5 a day, that's brutal.
Totally. Then medium time, offering better wages, and typically 2 shows per day in purpose-built theaters, a step up. And finally, the coveted big time.
The big leagues.
Exactly. The highest pay, performing in the grand, large urban theaters patronized by the middle and upper middle classes.
And the absolute peak of the big time was the Palace in New York. That's the legendary one.
Yes, the Palace Theater. Built by Martin Beck in 1913, later operated by Keith Albee. Getting a booking there was considered the apotheosis of remarkable careers. It was the absolute pinnacle.
So that's where the biggest stars played.
Absolutely. It featured the most inventive novelty acts, genuine national celebrities, the acknowledged masters of their craft, and that feature act, the headliner, was strategically placed second to last, remember, to ensure the audience stayed through most of the show. Clever scheduling.
So many iconic performers got their start or made their name in vaudeville, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. The list is incredible. We see names like U.B. Blake, the foundational ragtime and jazz pianist.
My bad, Jed.
The legendary magician Harry Houdini, Baby Rose Marie, who began as a child star, and Will Rogers, the beloved comedian and trick roper. Vaudeville was the crucible for an entire generation of American entertainers. It launched countless careers. What's also fascinating, and you touched on this, is how deeply vaudeville was intertwined with the massive social changes happening in America at the time.
Right. It wasn't just a passive form of entertainment then. It was reflecting and maybe even shaping culture.
Precisely. Its rise coincided with enormous internal migrations, people moving around the country, and waves of mass immigration from Europe. The vaudeville theater became a kind of dizzying melange, as one source puts it, of all these diverse cultural influences bumping up against each other.
It was like a mirror to society.
A mirror, and maybe more. It provided a space where the profound cultural realignment happening due to changes in class structures, gender roles, immigration patterns was played out on stage. Performers offered images, gestures, and symbols that helped a new, rapidly urbanizing population navigate their changing world. It gave them ways to understand themselves and others.
So it helped people, especially immigrants, connect with something, either their old identity or maybe their new American one.
It absolutely served as a crucial platform for that. It was a place where immigrant performers could find a voice and immigrant audiences could see themselves reflected, for better or worse sometimes, but reflected nonetheless.
Can you give an example?
Sure. The material mentions homesick Jewish immigrants finding a powerful sense of identity and connection watching Sophie Tucker sing My Yiddish Mama, or Irish Americans, many finding new status in urban society, celebrating that ascendancy through acts like Maggie Klein singing the boxing ballad, Throw Him Down, McCloskey.
And it wasn't just ethnic identity. It played a significant role in American music too, right? With ragtime.
Yes, absolutely. Vaudeville was critical here. It exposed white audiences on a mass scale to the incredible musical artistry of Black Americans, particularly the vibrant, syncopated rhythms of ragtime. This cross-cultural exchange on the vaudeville stage was fundamental in transforming popular music in America. It brought Black music into the mainstream.
Did it influence broader social norms beyond just ethnic identity, like for women?
It certainly pushed boundaries there, too. The material suggests that middle-class women who were starting to chafe against strict Victorian norms found inspiration or perhaps permission to experiment with alternatives by watching performers like Eva Tangway.
Who was she?
She was known for her wildly energetic singing and dancing, very un-Victorian, and for working people, escaping the repetitive monotony of factory or labor life for a few hours in a vaudeville theater with figures like Eddie Cantor offered a vital form of relief and maybe aspiration.
So it showed people different ways of being, different possibilities. A kind of escape, but also maybe something more.
It did. The inherent exuberance and often the irreverence of vaudeville directly challenged the more rigid Victorian code of conduct. It contributed to a new, emerging urban vision of success and happiness that was increasingly less about strict morality or traditional values and more about consumption, luxury, individual expression, a more modern outlook.
We've talked about the stages and the audiences, the whole vibe. But what about the people making it happen, the performers themselves? What was their life like? Sounds glamorous, but maybe not always.
Definitely not always glamorous. It was a demanding and often precarious existence, despite the potential for fame. The sources estimate that over 12,000 different people were employed in vaudeville at any given time, from the stars down to the chorus girls, the stagehands, the musicians, a whole industry.
12,000, that's a lot of people.
It is, and performers on the circuit were often on the road for a staggering 42 weeks out of the year.
42 weeks? That's almost constant travel.
Yeah.
Wow.
Relentless. And while the circuit system did provide a degree of stability by lining up bookings weeks or months in advance, it also concentrated immense power in the hands of the managers who ran those circuits, particularly B.F. Keith and E.F. Albee, who we mentioned earlier.
Right. And that power led to exploitation, didn't it?
That's the strong implication from the material, yes. The market, as one piece describes it, was essentially a monopsony, meaning just a few buyers, the circuit managers controlling everything. They could dictate terms.
So what did that mean for performers?
It meant managers imposed strict contracts, kept wages low for many performers, and had absolute control over scheduling, routing, everything. This imbalance of power naturally led performers to try and organize. They formed labor unions like the White Rats in 1900 to fight against unfair treatment and working conditions.
The White Rats, okay. Were the unions successful in improving conditions? Did they manage to fight back?
They made attempts, definitely. They led notable strikes in 1901 and 1916. However, the material makes it pretty clear that managers like Keith and especially Albee actively worked to crush any unionization efforts.
How did they do that?
Albee, in particular, seems to be remembered with intense bitterness by performers. He's quoted as saying he never trusted a man he couldn't buy, and his relentless air of holiness and grim visage are described as masking his destructive power over performers' careers. He sounds like a real piece of work.
So they didn't just resist, they actively dismantled the unions.
Yes, Albee's strategy was particularly effective and, frankly, brutal. He set up his own company union, basically a puppet union, called the National Vaudeville Artists, the NVA.
Okay.
And then he simply refused to book any performer who wasn't a member of his organization, the NVA. This effectively blacklisted members of the White Rats and destroyed their organizing efforts.
Wow, that's ruthless.
Completely. Albee maintained firm control over the NDA, ensuring no real opposition to his policies or his often abusive treatment of performers could take root. It's a stark reminder of the harsh labor realities that existed behind the glittering facade of vaudeville.
This discussion about power and performance and the control managers had leads us to an important question. What were the specific types of acts that were most popular, and what did their content reveal about the social dynamics of the era, especially around things like gender and ethnicity?
Right, we touched on the sheer variety, but let's dig into some specific themes we see popping up in the material.
Yeah, like the content itself. Was it all squeaky clean?
Well, there's a very wide spectrum, and it was enforced differently depending on the venue and the manager. Managers like Keith, as we said, were known for their strict enforcement of clean material, especially in their upscale, big-time houses aimed at families.
How strict?
We see descriptions of rules posted backstage, forbidding specific words, terms like slob, son of a gun, hully G. Performers could even be punished for addressing the audience directly or, get this, acknowledging applause too eagerly between acts.
Seriously? Don't be too happy the audience likes you.
Apparently. They really wanted a controlled, respectable experience for that middle-class audience they were cultivating. But simultaneously, there was the whole idea of blue envelopes, or blue material, meaning stuff that was risque, off-color.
Ah, the blue stuff. Was this common? Or hidden away.
It certainly existed, and it's described as sometimes being used as a deliberate marketing strategy to draw certain crowds, maybe in less polite venues. One perspective in the material sees the vaudeville stage itself as potentially a highly sexualized space, featuring unclad bodies, provocative dancers, and singers of blue lyrics.
So pushing boundaries in a different way.
Exactly. There was a focus on highlighting the female body, presenting it as a sexual delight, making it a kind of sexual spectacle, which definitely reflects changing norms about the public display of sexuality around that time.
So this constant tension between clean and risque. And women were central to a lot of this, it sounds like, both as performers and maybe as subjects.
Definitely. Acts focusing on women were consistently big sellers. The sources note that even innocent sister acts tended to be more popular than brother acts. There seemed to be a built-in audience appeal.
But was there pressure on female performers?
The material suggests some were pressured to emphasize their physical appearance over perhaps raw talent, focusing on their figure or wearing revealing gowns. There was sometimes a sense of surprise noted, like, oh, she's beautiful and talented.
But despite that potential for objectification, it sounds like vaudeville was still a crucial space for women to actually build careers, to find success.
It absolutely was. Despite the complexities and the pressures, vaudeville offered significant opportunities for women to achieve success on stage, often on par with men in terms of fame and drawing power. We even see mentions of announcements in the 1920s specifically seeking all-girl bands for tours, like the Ingenus or the Dixie Sweethearts.
That's cool. Who are some of the standout female performers highlighted in the sources? Any specific names?
Yeah, several. Trixie Ferganza, originally Delia O'Callahan, is highlighted, known for her catchphrase, "You know Trixie with her bag of tricks."
Huh, love that.
Right. She initially performed secretly in opera to help her family financially because female performers weren't always socially accepted back then. She rose to prominence filling in for others and was known for embracing her figure. She called it her perfect 46 on stage.
Yeah, she owned it.
Totally. And beyond performing, she was a writer and poet, used her platform for charity, supported social causes, and actively advocated for women's equality and self-acceptance.
Using the stage for social commentary and activism, that's powerful stuff back then.
It really is. May Irwin, born Ada Campbell, is another key figure mentioned. She started in a duo with her sister, the Irwin sisters, but later achieved major solo success. She became known for performing African-American influenced songs. She even wrote her own material and introduced the popular The Bully song.
And she was funny, too.
Yeah, apparently a master of improvisational comedy, toured successfully all around the world.
And Sophie Tucker, of course, we mentioned her song earlier.
The legendary Sophie Tucker, the last of the Red Hot Mamas. A Russian Jewish immigrant, she was initially advised to perform in blackface, which she actually did for 2 years.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, but she found far greater authentic success performing as herself, particularly with her iconic songs Some of These Days. The material also makes sure to mention the importance of blues singers like Ma Rainey, Ida Cox, and Bessie Smith, who performed both in mainstream vaudeville and on the complimentary black vaudeville circuits. They were huge.
Were women involved only on the performance side? Or behind the scenes, too?
No, the material also notes women in leadership roles, which is important. Amanda Thorpe founded a black theater, and the Griffin sisters managed several theaters, working to establish and maintain a black vaudeville circuit. So women were performers, writers, activists, and significant figures on the business side of vaudeville as well.
Okay. The material also delves into gender impersonation and its surprising connection to emerging queer subcultures. That seems like a really deep and complex area.
It's a fascinating intersection of performance history and social history, absolutely. Female impersonation itself had a long theatrical tradition, partly because there were eras when women were actually banned from the stage entirely.
Right.
Vaudeville's version is specifically linked back to minstrel traditions. The sources explore this from multiple angles, which is interesting.
What are those different perspectives? How did people see it?
Well, one view, looking at it through the lens of, say, pre-WWI gender power dynamics, sees female impersonation as potentially a conservative reaction, maybe an attempt to reassert male dominance by presenting women as, quote, an artificial construction created and dominated by men, kind of reducing women to a costume.
Okay. But there's a counterinterpretation, a different way to look at it.
Yes, a crucial one, especially from a queer historical perspective. This view argues that the vaudeville stage and acts like female impersonation actually function as a kind of microcosm. It reflected the broader, really complex social and cultural shifts around sexuality and gender that were profoundly impacting early 20th century American cities at that time.
How did it reflect those shifts? What was changing?
It was a time when traditional gender roles were becoming less stable, Modern notions of sexuality and identity were just starting to be cultivated. There was significant anxiety tied to the rise of the new woman.
The independent one.
Exactly. With her shorter hair, maybe smoking, seeking economic independence, involved in the suffrage movement, all things challenging established female norms.
And cities were changing, too.
Simultaneously, the rapid growth of American cities provided spaces, anonymity even, for homosexual communities to begin forming. Cities were full of single people moving in, and as social ideals shifted, gay and lesbian communities started to coalesce into a kind of urban demi-monde, an underground world.
And the scientific or medical understanding of sexuality at the time played into this.
Absolutely. It was during this period that sexologists began defining heterosexuality as the distinct normative category. And that, in turn, led to the pathologizing of homosexuality. Homosexuality was often linked directly to appearance, and performance inverts, as they were called, were seen as effeminate men or masculine women, perceived as being biologically the wrong gender.
So how did gender impersonation on the vaudeville stage interact with this whole charged environment?
Well, the sources discuss the figure of the fairy, which was the term then for an effeminate man often associated with urban male homosexual identity. This identity often involves specific performative tropes, certain hand gestures, ways of dressing, speech patterns that function as a subtle signaling system within that underground network.
Ah, like a coded language.
Kind of. And the vaudeville stage could potentially be a space where these kinds of performances, particularly female impersonation, might be understood or appreciated differently by a knowing segment of the audience. It might have offered a rare, somewhat public avenue for that kind of signaling, even if it wasn't explicit.
And Julian Eltinge is the central figure in this discussion, the most famous one.
Julian Eltinge was arguably the most famous female impersonator of the entire era. Hugely popular, and his career trajectory vividly illustrates how performers had to navigate these really complex social pressures. He employed strategies the material calls evasion and counter-performance, specifically to distance himself from any association with effeminacy or homosexuality in his public image. He meticulously constructed an image of a distinct, true, masculine self that was completely separate from his female stage characters. It was all about managing perception.
How did he build that masculine image? What did he do?
Through very calculated public relations. Press releases and photographs constantly emphasized activities considered definitively masculine at the time: hunting, farming, boxing. He was consistently portrayed as a robust man's man offstage.
It sounds like a really careful balancing act he had to perform.
It absolutely was. And the material connects the broader decline of female impersonation as a mainstream form of mass entertainment to its increasing perceived link with homosexuality in the public mind. As urban audiences gained more consumer power and exerted more influence on what was presented on stage, acts that were seen as too closely associated with homosexuality became less acceptable in mainstream vaudeville venues. Tastes changed, or maybe anxieties increased.
And Eltinge's own career reflected this shift. Did his popularity fade?
Yes, sharply. His appearance on a show called The Voice of Hollywood in 1929 is cited as really telling evidence of this decline. He went from headlining grand stages in these elaborate glamour drag productions to appearing in just a small nightclub segment on a news program. His once central performance art was reduced to a brief, somewhat marginal appearance. It shows how the cultural landscape had dramatically changed for that kind of act.
But the sources also point out that, regardless of Eltinge's personal sexuality, which we don't really know, his performances could still hold significance for queer audiences at the time.
Absolutely. That's a key point. For queer individuals in the audience, seeing someone like Eltinge on stage, even with all the careful image management, could carry a kind of subversive power. It was a public challenge to traditional gender boundaries. Some scholars view him as a prototype, a really significant precursor to the contemporary drag queen, highlighting a historical lineage for this form of performance that runs directly through vaudeville.
Wow. Okay, shifting gears a bit. Vaudeville was also known for its ethnic comedy, which could be pretty rough, right? Using stereotypes.
Oh, definitely. The sources note that vaudeville acts, and also early films which grew out of vaudeville, frequently drew on the experiences of recent immigrants. but often in ways that relied on heavy, sometimes pretty unsympathetic stereotypes.
Why were stereotypes so common then?
Well, these stereotypes were particularly prevalent during this period of intense social upheaval, rapid industrialization, urbanization, mass immigration. They often serve to reinforce existing social norms by lampooning those perceived as the other, maybe as a way of dealing with anxieties about change.
Can you give us some specific examples mentioned in the material? Which groups were targeted?
The material focuses quite a bit on the portrayal of Irish immigrants and Irish Americans as a case study. Common stereotypical characters included the Irish servant or cook, often presented as incompetent or foolish.
The Bridget character.
Exactly. Acts like the Russell Brothers, the Irish Servant Girls, where men in exaggerated costumes played these roles, were apparently very popular. And the Bridget character in early films was a recurring stereotype shown misinterpreting instructions, causing chaos, maybe getting drunk, or even, in one film described, comically being blown out a window.
Yikes. And the Irish cop stereotype, that was a thing too.
Yes, that was also common, often portrayed as inept or lazy. Characters named Mulcahy, Officer O'Toole, Officer Clancy, Officer Muldoon appeared frequently. They were often depicted as misunderstanding requests, making comic asides instead of doing their duty, falling asleep on the beat, or even being outswum by a small boy in one instance.
So these weren't exactly positive portrayals, were they? Pretty demeaning.
No, they often mocked a perceived unfamiliarity with American ways. The material suggests these portrayals might have been more targeted at newly arrived immigrants who hadn't yet assimilated or been schooled in American customs, rather than maybe the more established second-generation Irish Americans who were already successfully integrating and moving up the social ladder, a kind of punching down at the newcomers.
Did the stereotypes change over time as Irish Americans became more established?
The material indicates there was an evolution, yeah. The stereotype gradually shifted from the peasant figure of Patty to the urban working-class character of Pat, and eventually towards more positive, or at least aspirational figures like the Mix on the Make or solid men, becoming successful.
So, some progress.
Some. Later films did show more sympathetic or positive portrayals sometimes, like a young man joining the police force to earn money to bring his family over from Ireland in a film called Caught by Wireless, or another film presenting America as a land of promise for Irish immigrants. So it wasn't uniformly negative forever.
And how were Irish women represented in all this?
Their representation also reflected anxieties, particularly about Irish women gaining independence in America. Some portrayals depicted them as maybe needing to be taken care of, often by marrying a man. A synopsis for a film called Maggie Houlihan Gets a Job is mentioned, where the character tries working but eventually settles down and leaves it to her husband to get together the fortune she hoped to make. It suggests a narrative where female independence through work is ultimately supplanted by finding a husband, kind of reinforcing traditional roles.
So these representations, even when negative or stereotypical, they actually provide valuable insight into the social anxieties of the time and how ethnic groups were assimilating.
Exactly. They show how vaudeville, as this hugely popular medium, reflected and maybe even influenced the complex process of ethnic groups assimilating into a broader American identity. It was one of the most visible places where these evolving ideas and anxieties were presented to the public, warts and all. So what's fascinating here, moving forward in time, is how quickly vaudeville, this absolute juggernaut of entertainment, began to change and eventually decline. It feels like it happened fast.
It's hard to imagine something so widespread just fading away.
Well, it didn't disappear overnight, but its peak popularity is generally considered to be around 1915, give or take. And the major force that led to its decline, no surprise really, was the emergence and rapid rise of a completely new entertainment medium.
Movies, the rival that ultimately won out.
Exactly. Early moving pictures are described as starting as just a tinkerer's technology, something inventors were playing with. But they quickly transformed into an artistic, industrial, and consumer fantasy.
Who are the key players in developing film?
Inventors like Louis Le Prince, the Lumiere brothers over in France, and Thomas Edison here in the U.S. were rapidly developing the necessary technology cameras, viewers like Edison's kinetoscope, and eventually projection systems like the Vitascope.
How did movies first appear to the public? Were they shown in theaters right away?
Not exactly. Initially, they were often viewed individually. You'd go to a kinetoscope parlor, the first one opened in New York City on April 14th, 1894, and peer into a machine. Interestingly, Edison himself initially believed individual viewing was the future of the medium, not projection.
So you got that wrong. When did projection become public then?
Well, Edison saw that others were developing projection systems, so he quickly adapted his own tech. He rented space in a popular vaudeville hall, Coaster and Biles Music Hall in New York City, for the first public demonstration of his Vitascope projector on April 23, 1896.
In a vaudeville hall.
Yep. That date is often cited as the actual birth of the movie theater in America. Film literally got its commercial start being shown as an act within a vaudeville show.
Wow. So they just added it to the bill.
Precisely. Early short films were programmed as just another attraction on the vaudeville bill, maybe a short clip of an umbrella dance or ocean waves crashing, just another novelty act, basically.
And in the silent film era, there was still a role for live performers.
Yes, especially early on. Before talkies, vaudevillians would often perform what they called cooler acts, meaning acts that didn't require sound and were visually compelling, like jugglers or acrobats. They'd perform while the early, unreliable projectors were literally cooling off between reels to prevent them from overheating and catching fire.
So the live acts kept the show going during technical breaks.
Exactly. And that term feature film we use today.
Yeah. Where's that from?
That's a direct inheritance from vaudeville structure. The feature act on a vaudeville bill was the headliner, the biggest draw, placed strategically second to last on the program. As movies grew in length and popularity, they started filling that prime slot on the bill and became known as the feature presentation.
So film went from being a short, cooler act to the feature act, and then eventually just took over the whole show.
That's pretty much the trajectory, yeah. The rise of dedicated movie theaters really sealed vaudeville's fate. First came the storefront theaters and Nickelodeons popping up everywhere, offering entire programs of films for just 5 cents.
Nickelodeons, right.
By 1910, there were over 10,000 Nickelodeons across the U.S. They were attracting something like 20% of the entire American population weekly, and crucially, they appealed to growing numbers of women and children, broadening the audience beyond the sometimes male-dominated vaudeville houses.
And then came the grand movie palaces, which were a whole different level.
Oh, yeah. The first true movie palace, the Strand, opened in NYC in 1914. It had 3,000 seats, offered this incredibly luxurious escapist experience with comfortable seating, unobstructed views, a huge upgrade from the often cramped, sometimes smoky vaudeville theaters.
And they got even bigger.
They did. Palaces grew even grander, like Radio City Music Hall with its staggering 6,000 seats. Especially during the Depression years, these palaces offered an affordable escape, treating patrons like royalty for the price of a movie ticket. Vaudeville couldn't really compete with that scale or price point.
So as film technology advanced, first silent films getting longer and better, and then the real game changer, talkies.
It directly undercut the need for live vaudeville acts. Once you had films with synchronized sound, there was no longer a need for live acts to fill time or entertain while projectors cooled. The show was complete on-screen.
What happened to the vaudevillians then?
The material mentions how many performers struggled. People like the great-grandparents of someone named Melissa Hart, who were mentioned in one source, initially did those cooler acts, then maybe went overseas where vaudeville lasted a bit longer, and eventually found work with the USO during wartime or performing at county fairs as the main form just collapsed in the US and Europe.
It sounds like a really direct and ultimately losing competition for audiences.
It really was. By the end of 1926, the material indicates only about a dozen big-time vaudeville houses were still operating as pure vaudeville venues. Most had already converted to primarily showing films, maybe keeping just a few live acts as an opener before the movie.
Did performers try to adapt?
Some did. Some vaudevillians tried filming their acts as sound shorts, trying to jump to the new medium. Julian Eltinge, the female impersonator we talked about, pretty bluntly stated in 1927 that vaudeville was shot to pieces and could no longer afford to attract the big-name stars.
Because you could see the biggest stars in the world on screen for just a nickel or a dime.
Exactly. Film offered a more consistent, often technically higher quality product featuring top stars available at a fraction of the cost of a live show ticket. Why pay more to see a lesser act live when you could see Chaplin or Garbo on screen for cheap?
Were there internal factors too? Did vaudeville itself contribute to its own decline?
Yes, internal issues within vaudeville management certainly didn't help. Albie's infamous 5-a-day policy, introduced around 1929, forcing performers to do 5 shows daily in some venues.
We mentioned that earlier, yeah. Brutal.
It was designed to squeeze more profit out as audiences dwindled, but it utterly exhausted performers and rapidly depleted their available material. You can only do the same jokes or routines so many times a day before they wear thin.
And the content changed, too.
allowing more blue or risque material in some venues, perhaps in a desperate attempt to attract audiences, also alienated the very middle-class family audience that figures like Pastor and Keith had spent decades carefully cultivating. It was kind of a perfect storm. A superior new technology arrived, and vaudeville's own management made decisions that hastened its demise.
So is vaudeville just a relic then? Something confined to history books? Or does its story still mean something for us today? What's the takeaway?
Well, while the specific form of integrated vaudeville theater is definitely gone, its spirit, its DNA, absolutely lives on in contemporary entertainment. It didn't just vanish without a trace.
How do we see that legacy? Where are the echoes?
Certain specific elements are still around, even if we don't recognize them. The material mentions things like a performer dancing with a hat and cane or shouting, "One more time!" to encourage applause. These are direct echoes of vaudeville performance-style conventions.
Little things like that.
Yeah. And its broader influence is really clear in modern comedy. So much stand-up tradition, sketch comedy, it derives heavily from the traditions honed on vaudeville stages, and also from its slightly edgier cousin, burlesque, both of which were massive breeding grounds for comic talent.
And the drag connection.
And the connection we discussed earlier to female impersonation certainly links vaudeville historically to the art of modern drag performance. There's a lineage there.
Are there parallels in how we consume entertainment today? The material made a pretty bold comparison.
It did. It makes a compelling argument that platforms like TikTok are, in a way, ushering in a new age of vaudeville.
TikTok as modern vaudeville. Okay, unpack that a bit. That sounds interesting.
The description of TikTok in the material sounds strikingly familiar when you think about vaudeville. It's called a smorgasbord of content, an ecosystem of diverse, constantly changing variety acts.
Yeah, I see that.
Scrolling through your TikTok feed is fundamentally similar, in structure, to watching a vaudeville bill. You see this rapid succession of short, incredibly varied performances. Comedy, dance, music, weird talents, educational bits, everything. New trends rise and fall almost instantly.
Like novelty acts.
Exactly. And creators constantly recycle, remix, and reimagine successful acts or formats, just like vaudevillians would borrow and adapt routines.
The short, endless stream of variety.
Yeah.
The parallel is pretty strong when you put it that way.
It really is. TikTok's algorithm curates feeds, presenting super niche material alongside broad viral appeals, aiming constantly to keep you scrolling, and engaged a form of stipulation, as one piece puts it. Active engagement, not just passive escape. This mirrors vaudeville's core goal. Entertain a diverse audience with constant variety and keep them hooked. Keep them in their seats or keep them scrolling.
And the talent pool is just global now.
Exactly. The talent pool is global, facilitated by technology, but the underlying principle of a continuous stream of varied, short-form performances feels very, very familiar to the vaudeville model.
Beyond those direct links in performance style or format, what else can we learn from studying this era? What's the broader historical value?
Studying vaudeville offers really profound insights into American social and cultural history, definitely. Also the history of labor movements, seeing how performers tried to organize against powerful management. And crucially, the history of media itself specifically, that pivotal moment when live performance transitioned to recorded, mass-distributed media like film as the dominant form of entertainment.
And it shows how entertainment reflects society.
Absolutely. It shows us how popular entertainment is never just mindless fun. It actively reflects and shapes a society's anxieties, its identities, its aspirations, particularly around critical issues like gender, ethnicity, and class. Vaudeville was a stage where America worked through a lot of that stuff very publicly.
And the material even briefly touches on the contemporary performing arts world, right? Suggesting some connections there.
It does, yeah, suggesting broader themes that still echo today for live performers. Issues around adapting to changing times, finding new ways to engage audiences in a world saturated with digital content, and articulating the unique, irreplaceable value of a live, shared experience.
How so?
While the trend towards more flexible, multidisciplinary venues today, where a single theater might host concerts, comedy nights, plays, speakers, could be seen as a distant echo of vaudeville's original variety approach. It's a strategy to build broader, more robust audiences in a really challenging modern landscape. Diversify the offerings.
And even the act of researching vaudeville, putting this together from the sources you provided, teaches us something important.
Yes, definitely. The difficulty noted in piecing together the full history of vaudeville, because so much was ephemeral, highlights the inherent challenge in preserving the story of popular art forms. Things that were hugely important to millions of people at the time, but weren't always considered high culture, worthy of serious archiving or study until much later.
Yeah, a lot can get lost.
It's a reminder of how much cultural history can just disappear if we don't actively seek it out, preserve it, and talk about it.
So as we reflect on this whole journey from the gaslit stages and smoky halls of over a century ago, through the relentless lives of performers on the road, the complex ways it mirrored society, and finally, even to the screens in our pockets today.
We see that vaudeville was far more than just a sequence of acts, right? It was this vital, really dynamic force. It was instrumental in shaping American entertainment as we know it. It profoundly reflected massive social change, and it influenced our culture in ways that are still with us, often without us even realizing it.
So maybe think about the echoes you might recognize next time you're watching comedy or listening to certain kinds of music or even just scrolling through that endless feed of content. Could the spirit of vaudeville actually be closer than you think?
It's a really powerful connection to the past, I think, showing how the roots of our present entertainment landscape run deep and often into some quite surprising places.
Thanks for listening to All in All.